Good evening, friends, fiends, and night owl supremes. Welcome to A Bit Late, where tonight I have a bit of a treat for you. This is the story of the Beast, taken from an extremely long version of Beauty and the Beast, which we are all familiar with, and if you're not, you can click this video here. But this particular story is the Beast's sort of monologue after Beauty has reversed the spell on him, and he's no longer a beast but a prince. It is extremely insightful. We talk about who the fairy was that enchanted him. We also get into all the wars that his mother, the queen, fought. She's a very brilliant commander, it turns out. It's a lot of war. It's like, I thought it'd be a fun little thing to read, although it is not short. No way, not at all. I'm gonna try my best to sound like a prince, but might have to stop that because it's a long story. So do get like a whole pot of tea ready for this one. Get some blankets, pillows, summon your animal familiars, light your candles, turn on your fairy lights, and get ready to follow me into Once Upon a Time After the Curse is Broken, the story of the Beast. The king, my father, died before I was born. The queen would never have been consoled for his loss if her interest for the child she bore had not struggled with her sorrow. My birth caused her extreme delight. The sweet task of rearing the fruit of the affection of a so dearly beloved husband was destined to dissipate her affliction. The care of my education and the fear of losing me occupied her entirely. She was assisted in her object by a fairy of her acquaintance, who showed the greatest anxiety to preserve me in all kinds of accidents. The queen felt greatly obliged to her, but she was not pleased when the fairy asked her to place me entirely in her hands. I would imagine not. You are the apple of your mother's eye, why would she want to? The fairy had not the best of reputations. She was said to be capricious in her favors. People feared her more than they loved her, and even had my mother been perfectly convinced of the goodness of her nature, she could not have resolved to lose sight of me. I would think not. By the advice, however, of prudent persons, and for fear of suffering from the fatal effects of the resentment of this vindictive fairy, she did not flatly refuse her. Ooh, that's wise, but ooh, tough situation. If voluntarily confided to her care, there was no reason to suppose she would do me any injury. Experience had proved that she took pleasure in hurting those only by whom she considered herself offended. The queen admitted this and was only reluctant to forego the pleasure of gazing on me continually with a mother's eyes, which enabled her to discover charms in me I owed solely to her partiality. She still was irresolute as to the course she should adopt when a powerful neighbor imagined it would be an easy matter for her to seize upon the dominions of an infant governed by a woman. He invaded my kingdom with a formidable army. The queen hastily raised one to oppose him, and with a courage beyond her placed herself at the head of her troops and marched to defend our frontiers. Yes, battle mama. It was then that, being compelled to leave me, she could not avoid confiding to the fairy the care of my education. Because there's a war, he has to go to the fairy now. I was placed in her hands after she had sworn by all she held most sacred that she would, without the least hesitation, bring me back to the court as soon as the war was over, which my mother calculated would not last more than a year at the utmost. Uh-oh. Notwithstanding, however, the advantages she gained over the enemy, she found it impossible to return to the capital so soon as she expected. To profit by her victory, after having driven the foe out of her dominions, she pursued him into his own. So Mother is a super bomb army commander, very good with strategy. So her son, the prince, is in the care of this fairy who, there's rumors about her niceness. There's actually many rumors about how not nice she is. Anyway, the battle mother, the queen, took entire provinces, gained battle after battle, and finally reduced the vanquished to sue for a degrading peace, which she obtained only on the hardest conditions. After this glorious success, the queen returned triumphantly, and having enjoyed in anticipation the pleasure of beholding me once more, but having learned upon her march that her base foe, in violation of the treaty, had surprised and massacred our garrisons and repossessed himself of nearly all the places he had been compelled to cede to us, she was obliged to retrace her steps. No, a never-ending war. See, we didn't get this in the original tale, or the shorter ones. Now we get it. Honor prevailed over the affection which drew her towards me, and she resolved never to sheathe the sword till she had put it out of her enemy's power to perpetuate more treachery. The time employed in this second expedition was very considerable. She had flattered herself that 2 or 3 campaigns would suffice, but she had to contend with an adversary as cunning as he was false. He contrived to excite rebellion in some of our own provinces and to corrupt entire battalions, which forced the Queen to remain in arms for 15 years. She never thought of sending for me. She was always flattering herself that each month would be the last and she would be absent, and that she was on the point of seeing me again. This other king is preventing her from seeing her son. She's got to protect the people. I love all this backstory, though. It's like reading all the books in Skyrim or the Elder Scrolls. In the meanwhile, the fairy, in accordance with her promise, had paid every attention to my education. Nice. From the day she had taken me out of the kingdom, she had never left me, nor ceased to give me proof of the interest she felt in all that concerned my health and amusement. I evinced by my respect for her how sensible I was of her kindness. I showed her the same deference, the same attention that I would have shown to my mother, and gratitude inspired me with as much affection for her. For some time, she appeared satisfied with my behavior, but one day, without imparting to me the motive, she set out on a journey from which she did not return for some years. All the women are just leaving this poor guy. And when she did return, struck with the effect of her care for me, she conceived for me an affection differing from that of a mother. She had previously permitted me to call her by that name, but now she forbade me. I obeyed her without inquiring what her reasons were, or suspecting what she was about to exact from me. Uh-oh. I smell trouble. I saw clearly that she was dissatisfied, but could I imagine why she continually complained of my ingratitude? I was the more surprised at her reproaches as I did not feel I deserved them. They were always followed or preceded by the tenderest caresses. Uh-oh. I was not old enough to comprehend her. She was compelled to explain herself. This seems wrong. She did so one day when I evinced some sorrow mingled with impatience respecting the continued absence of the Queen. She reproached me for this, and on my assuring her that my affection for my mother in no wise interfered with what I owed to herself, she replied that she was not jealous, although she had done so much for me and had resolved to do more still, but that, to enable her to carry out her designs in my favor with greater freedom, it was requisite, she added, that I should marry her. Oh boy. That she did not desire to be loved by me as a mother, but as an admirer. This child, there's a long time of war. He could be 15, he could be older. But he's only known the Queen and this fairy, and it's really not cool to just switch the game on him. He has no real world experience. I'm assuming this is creepy. What happened to Beauty/Belle is creepy. This is creepy too. Yikes. Anyway, but as an admirer, that she had no doubt of my gratitude for her making this proposal or the great joy with which I should accept it, and that, consequently, I had only to abandon myself to the delight with which the certainty of becoming the husband of a powerful fairy, who could protect me from all dangers, assure me an existence full of happiness, and cover me with glory, must naturally awaken. Whew, that's a lot. I was sadly embarrassed by this proposition. Yeah, that's one word for it. I knew enough of the world in my own country to be aware that among the wedded portion of the community, the happiest were those whose ages and characters assimilated. And by the way he's talking, I don't know if he actually does. Seems very logical and mathematical and calculated. It's not wrong, but... And that many were much to be pitied who, marrying under opposite circumstances, had found antipathies existing between them which were the source of constant misery. I guess he's wise. The fairy being old and of a haughty disposition, I could not flatter myself that my lot would be so agreeable as she predicted. I was far from entertaining for her such feelings as one should for the woman with whom we intend to pass our days. And besides, I was not inclined to enter into any such engagement at so early an age. I want to know how old he is. My only desire was to see the queen again and to signalize myself at the head of her forces. I sighed for liberty. That was the sole boon that would have gratified me, and the only one the fairy would not grant. Sounds terrible. Sounds like a terrible living situation, poor prince. Made super awkward and uncomfortable and honestly kind of dangerous and sick. I had often implored her to allow me to share the perils to which I knew the queen exposed herself for the protection of my interests, but my prayers had hitherto been fruitless. Pressed to reply to the astonishing declaration she had made to me, I, in some confusion, recalled to her that she had often told me that I had no right to dispose of my hand without the commands of my mother, and in her absence. "That is exactly my opinion," she replied. "I do not wish you to do otherwise. I am satisfied that you should refer the matter to the queen. I have already informed you, beautiful princess," we're talking to Beauty, remember, "that I had been unable to obtain from the fairy permission to seek the queen, my mother. The desire she now had to receive her sanction, which she never doubted she should obtain, obliged her to grant, even without my asking, that which she had always denied me. But it was on the condition, by no means agreeable to me, that she should accompany me. I did what I could to dissuade her, but found it impossible, and we set out together with a numerous escort." Oh no, so he's trying to get his mom not to let this happen, and the fairy's like, "We're gonna make this happen." We arrived upon the eve of a decisive action. The queen had maneuvered with such skill that the next day was certain to decide the fate of the enemy. Good timing. Who would have no resource if he lost the battle. Oh no, they're deciding the whole fate, and this distraction is not going to be good. My presence created a great pleasure in the camp and gave additional courage to our troops, or not, who drew a favorable augury from my arrival. The queen was ready to die with joy, but this first transport of delight was succeeded by the greatest of alarm. Whilst I exulted in the hope of acquiring glory, the queen trembled at the danger to which I was about to expose myself. Too generous to endeavor to prevent me, she implored me by all her affection to take much care of myself as honor would permit, and entreat the fairy not to abandon me on that occasion. Her solicitations were unnecessary. The too susceptible fairy was as much alarmed as the queen, for she possessed no spell which could protect me from the chances of war. However, by instantly inspiring me with the art of commanding an army, oh how fun, how nice, I know Kung Fu kind of thing, I know how to command an army. Wow, nice fairy power. So the prince is now a military officer, and he has the know-how to do that. That's really cool. So he has the art of commanding an army, and the prudence requisite for so important an office. She achieved much. The most experienced captains were surprised at me. Yeah, you rookie. I remained master of the field. The victory was complete. I had the happiness of saving the queen's life and of preventing her from being made prisoner of war. The enemy was pursued with such vigor that he abandoned his camp, lost his baggage, and more than 3/4 of his army, while the loss on our side was inconsiderable. A slight wound which I had received was the only advantage the foe could boast of. But the queen, fearing that if the war continued some more serious mischief might befall me, in opposition to the desire of the whole army, to which my presence had imparted fresh spirit, made peace on more advantageous terms than the vanquished had ventured to hope for. So she's selling the winning army short to keep her son safe. That's I don't know, it's probably gonna be trouble. A short time afterward, we returned to our capital, which we entered in triumph. My occupation during the war and the continual presence of my ancient adorer had prevented me from informing the queen of what had occurred. Oh my god. Really, in all this time you haven't told your mom that this weird fairy asked you to marry her? Didn't cross your mind? You've been gone a long time. No. She was, therefore, completely taken by surprise when the fairy told her in so many words that she had determined to marry me immediately. Oh no. This declaration was made in this very palace, but which was at the time not so superb as it is at present. It had been a country resident of the late king, which 1,000 occupations had prevented his embellishing. My mother, who cherished everything that he had loved, oh, I love that, had selected it in preference to any other as a place of retirement after the fatigues of the war. At the avowal of the fairy, unable to control her first feelings and unused to dissemble, she exclaimed, "Have you reflected, madam, on the absurdity of the arrangement you proposed to me? In truth, it was impossible to conceive of one more ridiculous. In addition to this almost decrepit old age of the fairy, she was horribly ugly." Well, that's the first time I'm hearing about that. I thought she was, like, ageless. Now, what? What? I mean, I'm happy the prince didn't really mention that before, but, like, she's old and ugly. She wants to marry me, Mom. I'm like a kid. Or not. Over 15 years you've been gone. I fought in a war. It's probably 20s. Anyway, doesn't matter. Nor was this the effect of time. If she had been handsome in her youth, she might have preserved some portion of her beauty by the aid of her arts. But naturally hideous, her power could only invest her with the appearance of beauty for one day in each year. And that day ended, she returned to her former state. What? She's a powerful fairy, but she can't appear how she wants to be except for one day a year? One day? Wow. The fairy was surprised at the exclamation of the queen. Her self-love concealed from her all that was actually horrible in her person. At least she loved herself, though. And she calculated that her power sufficiently compensated for the loss of a few charms of her youth. I mean, kinda, like, I have to say, if it was like an old man fairy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It would just be like, yeah, he liked himself and he was old and gristled, but he was old. What do you think? I mean, he's old. Not, oh, he didn't retain his youthful look. How dare he? Anyway, what do you... Now I have to sound like an old fairy. "What do you mean," she said to the queen, "by an absurd arrangement? Consider that it is imprudent in you to make me remember what I have condescended to forget. You ought only to congratulate yourself on possessing a son so amiable that his merit induces me to prefer him to the most powerful genie in all the elements. And as I have deigned to descend to him, accept with respect the honor I am good enough to confer on you, and do not give me time to change my mind." Yeesh. The queen, as proud as the fairy could, had never conceived that there was a rank on earth higher than the throne. She valued little of the pretended honor which the fairy offered her. Having always commanded everyone who approached her, she by no means desired to have a daughter-in-law to whom she must herself pay homage. That's also, really weird. Therefore, far from replying to her, she remained motionless and contented herself with fixing her eyes upon me. I was as much astonished as she was, and fixing my eyes on her in the same manner. It was easy for the fairy to perceive that our silence expressed sentiments very opposite to the joy with which she should have inspired us. "What is the meaning of this?" she said sharply. "How comes it that the mother and son are both silent? Has this agreeable surprise deprived you of the power of speech? Or are you blind and rash enough to reject my offer? Say, prince," said she to me, "are you so ungrateful and so imprudent as to despise my kindness? Do you not consent to give me your hand this moment?" "No, madame, I assure you," replied I quickly. "Although I am sincerely grateful to you and your past favors, I cannot agree to discharge my debt to you by such means. And, with the queen's permission, I decline to part so soon with my liberty." Good for him. "Name any other mode of acknowledging your favors, and I will not consider it impossible. But, as to that you have proposed, excuse me if you please, for..." She cuts him off. "How, insignificant creature!" interrupted the fairy furiously. "Thou darest to resist me? And you, foolish queen, you see without anger this conduct. What do I say? Without anger? It is you who authorize it, for it is your own insolent looks that have inspired him with the audacity to refuse me." Oh boy, I don't like this fairy. The queen, already stung by the contemptuous language of the fairy, was no longer mistress of herself, and accidentally casting her eyes on a looking-glass before which we happened to be standing at the moment, the wicked fairy thus provoked her. "What answer can I make you," she said, "that you ought not to make to yourself? deign to contemplate without prejudice the object this glass presents to you and let it reply for me." The fairy easily comprehended the queen's insinuation. "It is the beauty, then, of this precious son of yours that renders you so vain," she said to her, "and exposed me to so degrading a refusal. I appear to you unworthy of him. Well," she continued, raising her voice furiously, "I have taken so much pains to make him charming, it is fit that I should complete my work, and that I should give you both the chance, as novel as remarkable, to make you remember what you owe to me. Go, wretch," she said to me. "Boast that thou hast refused thy heart and thy hand. Give them to her who finds this more worthy of them than I am." So saying, my terrible lover struck me a blow to the head. It was so heavy that I was dashed to the ground on my face and felt as though I were crushed by the fall of a mountain. Irritated by this insult, I struggled to rise, but found it impossible. The weight of my body had become so great that I could not lift myself. All that I could do was to sustain myself on my hands, which had in an instant become 2 horrible paws, and the sight of them apprised me of the change I had undergone. My form was that in which you found me. I cast my eyes for an instant on that fatal glass, and could no longer doubt my cruel and sudden transformation. Poor prince. My despair rendered me motionless. The queen at this dreadful sight was almost out of her mind. To put the last seal upon her barbarity, the furious fairy said to me in an ironical tone, "Go make illustrious conquest, more worthy of thee than an august fairy. And as sense is not required when one is so handsome, I command thee to appear as stupid as thou art horrible, and to remain in this state until a young and beautiful girl shall of her own accord come to seek thee, although fully persuaded thou wilt devour her. She must also," continued the fairy, "after discovering that her life is not in danger, conceive for thee a sufficiently tender affection to induce her to marry thee. Until thou canst meet with this rare maiden, it is my pleasure that thou remain an object of horror to thyself and to all who behold thee. As to you, too happy mother of so lovely a child," she said to the queen, "I warn you that if you acknowledge to anyone that this monster is your son, he shall never recover his natural shape. Neither interest nor ambition nor the charms of his conversation must assist to restore him to it. Adieu, but do not be impatient. You will not have long to wait. Such a darling will soon find a remedy for his misfortune." "Ah, cruel one," exclaimed the queen. "If my refusal has offended you, let your vengeance light on me. Take my life, but do not, I conjure you, destroy your own work." "You forget yourself, great princess," replied the fairy in an ironical tone. "You demean yourself too much. I am not handsome enough for you to condescend to entreat me, but I am firm in my resolutions. Adieu, powerful queen, adieu. Beautiful prince, it is not fair that I should no longer annoy you with my hateful presence. I withdraw, but I have still charity enough to warn thee," addressing herself to me, "that thou must forget who thou art. If thou sufferest thyself to be flattered by vain respects or by pompous titles, thou art lost irretrievably, and thou art equally lost if thou should dare to avail of thyself the intellect I leave thee possessed of to shine in conversation." Whew, tough deal with that little fairy. Little old fairy. Harsh. He can't even use any of the things he is to be who he is. That's tough. With these words, she disappeared and left me and the queen in a state of which can neither be described nor imagined. Lamentations are the consolation of the unhappy, but our misery was too great to seek relief in them. My mother determined to stab herself, and I fling myself in the adjacent canal. Oh, wow, that got really dark. Without communicating our intentions to each other, we were on the point of executing these fateful designs, when a female of majestic mien, and whose manner inspired us with profound respect, appeared and bade us remember that it was cowardice to succumb to these great misfortunes, and that with time and courage there was no evil that could not be remedied. The queen, however, was inconsolable. Tears streamed from her eyes, and not knowing how to inform her subjects that their sovereign was transformed into a horrible monster, she abandoned herself to the most fearful despair. The fairy, for she was one, and the same woman you have seen here, P.S. Friends and Fiends, this is the fairy that was, I think, visiting Beauty in her dreams, being like, "Don't give up. You don't know the full extent. Stay true to yourself, be nice, that kind of thing. In her dreams, there's a fairy woman appearing. So, yeah, this is her. Knowing both her misery and her embarrassment recalled to her the indispensable obligation she was under to conceal from her people this dreadful adventure. That's what we're calling this whole ordeal an adventure, eh? Cool. And in lieu of yielding to despair, it would be better to seek some remedy for the mischief. Is there one to be found? Exclaimed the queen, which is powerful enough to prevent the fulfillment of a fairy's sentence. Yes, madam, replied the fairy. There is a remedy for everything. I am a fairy as well as she whose fury you have just felt the effects of, and my power is equal to hers. It is true I cannot immediately repair the injury she has done to you, for we are not permitted to act directly in opposition to each other. She who has caused your misfortune is older than I, and age has amongst us a particular title to respect. But as she could not avoid attaching a condition upon which the spell might be broken, I will assist you to break it. I grant that it will be a difficult task to terminate this enchantment, but it does not appear to me to be impossible. Let me see what I can do for you by the exertion of all the means in my power. Ah, nice lady, fairy. Upon this she drew a book from under her robe, and after taking a few mysterious steps, she seated herself at a table and read for a considerable time with such intense application that large drops of perspiration stood on her forehead. At length she closed the book and meditated profoundly. I love this lady, this little fairy. She's just sweating, reading a book and just thinking it over. I can see the charts and graphs in her head just arranging themselves to click in place. The expression of her countenance was so serious that for some time we were led to believe that she considered my misfortune irreparable. But recovering from a sort of trance and her features resuming their natural beauty, of course, though she's pretty, all the fairy tales I've read recently have this as a theme, and it's like, oh, really? Come on. Anyway, she informed us that she had discovered a remedy for our disasters. It will be slow, she said, but it will be sure. Keep your secret, let it not transpire, so that anyone can suspect you are concealed beneath this horrible disguise. For in that case you will deprive me of the power of delivering you from it. Your enemy flatters herself that you will divulge it. It is for that reason she did not take from you the power of speech. Ooh. The queen declared that the condition was an impossible one, as 2 of her women had been present at the fatal transformation and had rushed out of the apartment in great terror, which must have excited the curiosity of the guards and the courtiers. She imagined that the whole court was by this time aware of it, and that all the kingdom and even all the world would speedily receive the intelligence, and she's not wrong about that. But the fairy knew a way to prevent the disclosure of the secret. She made several circles, now solemnly, now rapidly, uttering words of which we could not comprehend the meaning, and finished by raising her hand in the air in the style of one who was pronouncing an imperative order. This gesture, aided too by the words she had uttered, was so powerful that every breathing creature in the palace became motionless and was changed into a statue. Ah, so not invisible, mysterious helpers or lampshades, or candelabras and clocks and things that cook and clean, but a statue. They are all still in the same state. They are the figures you behold in various directions and in various attitudes they had assumed at the instant the fairy's potent spell surprised them. The queen, who at that moment had cast her eyes upon the great courtyard, observed this change taking place in a prodigious number of persons. The silence which suddenly succeeded to the stir of a multitude awoke a feeling of compassion in her heart for the many of innocent beings who were deprived of a life for my sake. But the fairy comforted her by saying that she would only retain her subjects in that condition as long as their discretion was necessary. It was a precaution that she was compelled to take, but she promised she would make it up to them, and that the period they passed in that state would not be added to the years allotted to their existence. Well, that's wonderful, thank goodness. They will be so much the younger, said the fairy, so cease to deplore them and leave them here with your son. He will be quite safe. For I have raised such thick fogs around this castle that it will be impossible for anyone to enter it but when we think fit. Oh, that's an interesting twist. The fairy is very picky about who gets to come into the castle. I will convey you, she continued, why your presence is necessary. Your enemies are plotting against you. Be careful to proclaim to your people that the fairy who educated your son retains him near for an important purpose, and keeps him with her also all of the persons who were in attendance on you." It was not without shedding a flood of tears that my mother could force herself to leave me. The fairy renewed her assurances to her that she would always watch over me, and protested that I had only to wish and to see the accomplishment of my desires. She added that my misfortunes would shortly end, provided neither the queen nor I raised an obstacle by some act of impudence. All these promises could not console my mother. Well, I bet. This is horrible. She wished to remain with me and to leave the fairy or anyone she might consider the most proper person to govern the kingdom. But fairies are imperious and will be obeyed. Yikes. For sure, though. My mother, fearing by refusal to increase my miseries and deprive me of the aid of this beneficent spirit, consented to all she insisted on. She saw a beautiful car approach, and it was drawn by the same white stags that had brought her here today. "Mom's finally home." The fairy made the queen mount by her side. She had scarcely time to embrace me. Her affairs demanded her presence elsewhere, and she was warned that a longer sojourn in this place would be prejudicial to me. She was transported with extraordinary velocity to the spot where her army was encamped. That was lucky. How does he know this, though? He doesn't know where his mom went after she left him. She just got back today. The spell was broken just now. Maybe he had communication with this fairy all along. He probably did. They were not surprised to see her arrive with this equipage. Everybody believed her to be accompanied by the old fairy, for the one who was with her kept herself unseen and departed again immediately to return to this place, which, in an instant, she embellished with everything that her imagination could suggest and her art supply. The good-natured fairy permitted me to add whatever I fancied would please me, and after having done for me all she could, she left me with exhortations to take courage and promising to come occasionally and impart to me such hopes as she might entertain of a favorable issue to my adventure. Again, we're calling this an adventure. It is a curse. It's a misfortune. It's what? An adventure is one way to put it, I guess, but I don't know if that's the best way to put it. I seemed to be alone in the palace. I was only so to sight. I was served as if I were in the midst of my courtiers, and my occupations were nearly the same as those which were afterwards yours. I read, I went to the play. Really? Interesting. What play? Who is recite? Anyway, I cultivated a garden in which I had made to amuse me and found something agreeable in everything I undertook. What I planted arrived at perfection in the same day. It took no more time to produce the bower of roses to which I am indebted for the happiness of beholding you here. So, if he was trapped here for a long time, but everything he sets out to achieve gets done that day, like he plants a seed and the roses are already grown. Like, where's the fun in that? I guess it is cool, but that doesn't happen, right? In the real world, and it would pass the time by watching the roses grow. No, he's like, I'm gonna get really upset with this man for stealing a rose that took me a day to grow. I guess it's all part of this fairy's plan though, so sure. Fairy tale logic, I love it. / it confuses me. It's gonna be fine though. My benefactress came to see me very often. Her presence and her promises alleviated my distress. Through her, the queen received news of me and I news of the queen. One day I saw the fairy arrive with a joy sparkling in her eyes. "Dear prince," she said to me, "the moment of your happiness approaches." Then she informed me that he who you believed to be your father had passed a very uncomfortable night in the forest. She related to me in a few words the adventure which had caused him to undertake the journey, again with the adventure, without revealing to me your real parentage. Oh, that's right, because Beauty's parents are spoiler fairies? She apprised me that the worthy man was compelled to seek asylum from the misery he had endured 24 hours. "I go," said she, "to give orders for his reception. It must be an agreeable one. He has a charming daughter. I propose that she shall release you. I have examined the conditions which my cruel companion has attached to your disenchantment. It is fortunate that she did not ordain that your deliverer should come hither out of love for you." On the contrary, she insisted that the young maiden should expect no less than death, and yet expose herself to it voluntarily. Yikes. I have thought of a scheme to oblige her to take that step. It is to make her believe that the life of her father is in danger, and that she has no other means of saving him. I know that in order to spare her father at any expense on her account, she has asked him only to bring her a rose, whilst her sisters have overwhelmed him with extravagant commissions. She knows like everything. He will naturally avail himself of the first favorable opportunity. Hide yourself in this arbor, and seizing him the instant he attempts to gather your roses, threaten him that death will be the punishment of his audacity unless he give you one of his daughters, or rather unless she sacrifice herself according to the decree of our enemy. This man has 5 daughters besides the one I have destined for you, but not one of them is sufficiently magnanimous to purchase the life of their father at the price of their own. Beauty alone is capable of so grand an action. She really has thought of everything, hasn't she? I executed exactly the fairy's commands. You know, lovely princess, with what success. The merchant, to save his life, promised what I demanded. I saw him depart without being able to persuade him that he would return with you. I could not flatter myself that my desire would be fulfilled. What torment I did not suffer during the month he had requested me to allow him. I longed for its termination only to be certain of my disappointment. That would be tough, though. I could not imagine for a young, lovely, and amiable girl would have the courage to seek a monster of whom she believed she was doomed to be the prey. Even supposing her to have sufficient fortitude to devote herself, she would have to remain with me without repenting the steps she had taken, and that appeared to be an invincible obstacle. Besides, how could she behold me without dying with affright? With affright? I love it. I passed my miserable existence in these melancholy reflections. He is a very morose and morbid prince, and very in touch with his feelings, which is very refreshing, I think. And never was I more to be pitied. The month, however, elapsed, and my protectress announced to me your arrival. You remember, no doubt, the pomp with which you were received. Not daring to express my delight in words, I endeavored to prove it to you by the most magnificent signs of rejoicing. The fairy, ceaseless in her attentions to me, prohibited me from making myself known to you. Whatever terror I might inspire you with, or whatever kindness you might show me, I was not permitted to seek to please you. Yikes. Nor express any love for you, nor to discover to you in any way who I was. I could have recourse, however, to excessive good nature, as fortunately the malignant fairy had forgotten to forbid me of giving you proof of that. Oh, buddy. These regulations seemed hard to me, but I was compelled to subscribe to them, and I resolved to present myself before you for only a few moments every day, to avoid long conversations in which my heart might betray its tenderness. I think he just is like, he asks her to sleep with him every night. It's very quick. You came, charming princess, and the first sight of you produced upon me a diametrically opposite effect to what my monstrous appearance must have done upon you. To see you was instantly to love you. Entering your apartment, trembling, my joy was excessive to find that you could behold me with greater intrepidity than I could behold myself. You delighted me infinitely when you declared that you would remain with me. An impulse of self-love, which I retained even under the most horrible of forms, led me to believe that you had not found me so hideous as you anticipated. Your father departed satisfied, but my sorrow increased as I reflected that I was not allowed to win your favor in any way except by indulging the caprices of your taste. Your demeanor, your conversation, as sensible as it was unpretending, everything in you convinced me that you acted solely on the principles dictated to you by reason and virtue, and that consequently I had nothing to hope for from a fortunate caprice. I was in despair at being forbidden to address you in any other language than that which the fairy had dictated, and which she had expressly chosen as coarse and stupid. In vain I did represent to her that it was unnatural to expect you would accept my proposition to marry you. Her answer was always, patience, perseverance, or all is lost. To recompense you for my silly conversation, she assured me she would surround you with all sorts of pleasures and give me the advantage of seeing you continually, without alarming you or being compelled to say rude and impertinent things to you. She rendered me invisible. Oh, creep. That's creepy. And I had the gratification of seeing you waited on by spirits who were also invisible or who presented themselves to you in the shapes of various animals. I love it. Imagine cats, just cats, all the way down. Be like, not to bring Critical Role into this again, but it'd be like Caleb's tower, his little tower everybody sleeps in. It's just cats, all the cats. More than this, the fairy caused you to behold my natural form in your nightly slumbers. Yes, she's giving her naughty dreams about the true princess form. And in portraits by day, and made it speak to you in your dreams as I should have spoken to you myself. Because there was no restrictions on this fairy, right? You obtained a confused idea of my secret and my hopes, which she urged you to realize. And by the means of a starry mirror, I witnessed all your interviews. Creep, he's watching her dreams. This is creepy. Like, I know it's a dreadful situation, but this is creepy. And read it in either all you imagined you uttered or all that you actually thought. Wait, and he gets to see her thoughts too? That's weird. This position, however, did not suffice to render me happy. I was only so in a dream, and my sufferings were real. The intense affection with which you had inspired me to oblige to complain of the restraint under which I lived. But my state was much more wretched when I perceived that these beautiful scenes had no longer any charms for you. I saw you shed tears which pierced my heart and would have destroyed me. You asked me if I was alone here, and I was on the verge of discarding my feigned stupidity and assuring you by the most passionate vows of the fact. They would have been uttered in terms that would have surprised you and caused you to suspect that I was not so coarse a brute as I pretended to be. I was on the point of even declaring myself when the fairy, invisible to you, appeared before me. Oh, by a threatening gesture which terrified me. What did she do? What gesture did she make that terrified the beastly prince? Anyway, she found a way to close my lips. Thank goodness, I guess. Oh heavens, by what means did she impose silence on me? She approached you with the poignard in her hand and made signs to me that the first word I uttered would cost you your life. Oh, that's what she did. I was so frightened that I naturally relapsed into the stupidity she had ordered me to effect. Because he cares for her, that was the frightening gesture. I love it. My sufferings were not yet at an end. You expressed a desire to visit your father. I gave you permission without hesitation. Could I have refused you anything? But I regarded your departure as my death blow, and without the assistance of the fairy, I must have sunk under it. During your absence, that generous being never quitted me. She saved me from destroying myself, which I should have done in my despair, not daring to hope that you would return. See, this guy is so emotional and dramatic, and this monologue is, it's a lot. The time you had passed in this palace rendered my condition more insupportable than it had been previously, because I felt I was the most miserable of all men without the hope of making it known to you. Poor beast prince. My most agreeable occupation was to wander through the scenes which you had frequented, but my grief was increased by no longer seeing you there. The evenings and hours I used to have the pleasure of conversing with you for a moment redoubled my afflictions, and were still more painful to me. Those 2 months, the longest I have ever known, ended at last, and you did not return. It was then my misery reached its peak, and that the fairy's power was too weak to prevent my sinking under my despair. The precautions she took to prevent my attempting my life were useless. I had a sure way which eluded her power. It was to refrain from food. By the potency of her spells, she contrived to sustain me for some time, but having exhausted her secrets, I grew weaker and weaker, and finally had but a few moments to breathe when you arrived to snatch me from the tomb. I shouldn't laugh, this is serious, this is when it all starts. We're getting back to the present moment when everything is good, but so despairing, beast. Your precious tears, more efficacious than all the cordials of the disguised genie who attended on me, delayed my soul upon the point of flight. In learning from your lamentations that I was dear to you, I enjoyed perfect felicity, and that felicity was at its height when you accepted me for your husband. Still, I was not permitted to divulge to you my secret, and the beast was compelled to leave you without daring to disclose to you the prince. You know the lethargy into which I fell, and which ended only with the arrival of the fairy and the queen. On awaking, I found myself as you behold me, without being aware of how the change took place. You have witnessed all what followed, but you could only imperfectly judge of the pain which the obstinacy of my mother caused in me opposing the marriage so suitable and glorious for me. I had determined, princess, rather to be a monster again than to abandon the hope of being the husband of so virtuous and charming a maiden. Had the secret of your birth remained forever a mystery to me, love and gratitude would not less have assured me that in possessing you I was the most fortunate of men. The prince thus ended his narration, and Beauty was about to speak, when she was prevented by a burst of loud voices and warlike instruments. And that's when the Queen Mother arrives home. But that is the end of the beast's monologue. We learned so much, but before I get into it and talk about it, the end of the beastly monologue. Boy oh boy, did we learn a lot about the fairy who enchanted him, the conditions in which she was left alone with him, that his mother is she's really good at war. That's awesome. Or not, because the enemy kept coming back, or he was just he had no moral compass or honor. He was attacking, the positions behind her back and turning her own army against her. That is something the Wolf Queen would have done, though. If you're interested in that, check it out here. All 8 books are recorded and read on the channel. It's from Skyrim. It's pretty good. But yeah, also, he was a war commander, and also that the fairy is surprising old and ugly because she's just mean. And then how much he just loved Beauty when she was at the palace. But he couldn't tell her, of course. But yeah, that is some insight into what it was like for the beast, how he came to be the beast, and he doesn't know how he became a prince again because he was passed out. But we do. So without that, I do hope you enjoyed this sort of behind-the-scenes monologue in the old fairy tale. I enjoyed reading it. It was a lot. I hope you have enjoyed your pot of tea, if that's what you did. But do stay tuned for more videos and stories. But now, off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again, and until then, stay spooky, my friends. Good night.